In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. It was Christmas Eve on a large university campus in the northeastern United States. Snow had fallen lightly all afternoon, dusting the stone buildings and walkways with a quiet white stillness. Inside the main auditorium, however, the air felt heavy, charged with anticipation, tension, and the low murmur of hundreds of voices. The event had been advertised for weeks, an open interfaith dialogue on faith, truth, and salvation. Flyers had circulated across campus, shared widely on student forums and social media. Some called it courageous. Others called it controversial. By nightfall, every seat in the auditorium was filled. Students stood along the walls, some sitting on the floor, unwilling to miss what many were already calling the most intense discussion this university had seen in years. At the center of the stage stood a single podium beneath soft white lights. Behind it hung a modest Christmas wreath, simple, symbolic, and unmistakably seasonal. A woman stepped forward. She was in her early 30s, dressed in a dark, conservative outfit that reflected her vocation. A silver cross rested visibly against her chest. Her posture was confident, practiced. This was Sister Amanda, well known in academic and interfaith circles for her sharp intellect, commanding presence, and unshakable confidence in her beliefs. She adjusted the microphone and scanned the room. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and steady. "Tonight," she began, "is not about offense. It is about truth." The room quieted. She spoke of history, of faith traditions, of humanity's long search for meaning. Her words flowed smoothly, polished by years of debate and teaching. She framed Christianity as the final answer to a broken world, a message rooted in grace rather than effort, in mercy rather than accountability. Then her tone shifted. She spoke of Islam, not with hostility, but with certainty. She described it as a later historical development, a human attempt to correct what came before rather than a message sent from the divine itself. According to her, salvation was not something earned, questioned, or balanced. It was granted solely through faith in divine mercy as she understood it. Some in the audience nodded thoughtfully. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sister Amanda continued, her confidence unwavering. "If salvation is a gift," she said, "then it cannot depend on human action. To reject that gift is to reject truth itself." A ripple of tension passed through the hall. Then she paused, placed both hands on the podium, and said calmly, "If there is any Muslim student here tonight who believes otherwise, who believes their faith can stand under honest scrutiny, I invite you to come forward." Silence. Not the awkward kind, but the heavy kind, where time seems to slow, and every breath feels loud. From the middle rows someone stood. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s. She wore a simple white headscarf, neatly arranged, and modest clothing that blended quietly into the crowd. There was nothing dramatic about her appearance, yet something about her presence immediately drew attention. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. She walked toward the stage with calm, measured steps, as if she had already accepted whatever might follow. Whispers spread across the room. "Who is she? Is she really going up there? This is about to get serious." When she reached the stage, she stood opposite Sister Amanda. Two women. Two worldviews. One space. The moderator stepped in briefly, reminding everyone of the rules: respect, no interruptions, and a commitment to reason over reaction. The microphone was placed in front of the young woman. She took a breath, not deep, not dramatic, just steady. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but unmistakably clear. "I don't want to argue," she said. "I want to understand." That alone shifted the atmosphere. She continued, "You said salvation is granted without regard to human choice or action. If that is the case, may I ask, where does responsibility fit?" The question was simple, almost gentle, yet it landed with unexpected weight. She wasn't attacking. She wasn't defending. She was asking, "If a person is not truly responsible for their choices," she added, "then what meaning do justice, accountability, or moral consequence really have?" A quiet tension settled over the audience. Some leaned forward instinctively. Others crossed their arms, thinking. Sister Amanda listened closely, her expression controlled but alert. The young woman went on, carefully choosing her words. "I'm not questioning mercy," she said. "I'm questioning coherence. A system of belief must align with both compassion and fairness, or it risks losing meaning." No raised voice. No dramatic gestures. Just clarity. The room felt different now. What had begun as a challenge was turning into something else, a space where people were no longer waiting to respond, but beginning to reflect. The moderator glanced between the two women, sensing the shift. Something had begun. Not a clash, but a journey. And everyone in the room seemed to understand that whatever followed would not end quickly, nor comfortably. The moderator nodded slightly, signaling for Sister Amanda to respond. She smiled, measured, professional, but there was a pause before she spoke. Not long enough to be noticed by most, yet long enough to reveal that the question had not landed lightly. "Responsibility," she said at last, "exists, but it is not the foundation of salvation. Human effort is imperfect. No amount of moral striving can reach divine perfection. That is why grace must come first." Her voice regained strength as she spoke, settling back into familiar ground. She explained that human beings, flawed by nature, could not earn redemption through actions. Salvation, in her view, was an act of unconditional mercy, freely given, not calculated. The audience listened attentively. Many had heard this argument before, yet rarely in a setting where it was being examined so closely. The young Muslim woman waited until Sister Amanda finished. She did not interrupt. She did not rush. Then she spoke again. "I understand the concern about human imperfection," she said. "But if accountability is not central, then why does moral failure still matter at all?" A murmur passed through the room. She continued, her tone thoughtful rather than confrontational. "In everyday life, we hold people responsible precisely because we believe their choices mean something. Laws, ethics, even personal relationships depend on that assumption." She looked around the hall, briefly including the audience in the conversation. "If someone causes harm," she said, "we don't excuse it by saying effort is imperfect. We still expect responsibility. Why would the moral structure of existence itself be held to a lower standard than human society?" The question hung in the air. Sister Amanda adjusted her grip on the microphone. "Earthly justice," she replied, "is not the same as divine justice. God's ways are higher than ours." The statement was firm, but it carried a subtle defensiveness. The young woman nodded slowly, acknowledging the point. "I agree that the divine transcends us," she said. "But transcendence does not mean contradiction." That word, contradiction, shifted something in the room. "If justice exists," she continued, "it must be recognizable as justice. Otherwise, it becomes indistinguishable from arbitrariness." Several students exchanged glances. A few nodded unconsciously. The young woman went on. "If mercy cancels responsibility entirely, then moral choice becomes symbolic rather than real. Reward and consequence lose their meaning." She paused, then added quietly, "And if meaning disappears, faith becomes something we inherit, not something we live." Silence followed, not resistance, but processing. Sister Amanda took a breath. "Faith," she said, "is trust, not analysis." The response was immediate but calm. "Trust is strongest," the young woman replied, "when it is informed. Blind trust may obey, but it does not understand." A subtle tension moved across Sister Amanda's face. It wasn't anger. It was something closer to uncertainty, quickly hidden but present. The moderator leaned forward slightly, sensing the depth of the exchange. This was no longer an academic exercise. It was philosophical, ethical, and personal. Sister Amanda shifted the discussion. "Let's speak about love," she said. "Divine love precedes all human action. It does not wait for worthiness." The young woman smiled faintly, not dismissively, but warmly. "Love," she said, is not weakened by accountability. In fact, love without responsibility often becomes indulgence. She explained gently that true care for another being assumes their capacity to choose, to grow, to correct themselves. Without that, compassion loses direction. In any meaningful relationship, she added, forgiveness matters because responsibility exists, not because it disappears. The audience was no longer passive. People leaned forward. Pens moved across notebooks. Phones remained forgotten. Sister Amanda responded by speaking of faith as surrender, of letting go of the burden of self-judgment. But if surrender removes responsibility, the young woman asked, why does guilt still exist? Why do we still feel the weight of right and wrong? That question struck deeper than the others. It wasn't abstract. It was human. She continued, guilt suggests that somewhere within us, we recognize choice. And if choice exists, then accountability is not an obstacle to mercy, it is its context. Sister Amanda hesitated before replying. The room noticed. She spoke about mystery, about truths that exceed rational explanation, about accepting what cannot be fully understood. The young woman listened carefully, then answered with care. Mystery, she said, should deepen humility, not replace clarity. When mystery is used to avoid coherence, it stops guiding and starts confusing. A few heads lowered thoughtfully. Others stared straight ahead, absorbed. The atmosphere in the auditorium had transformed. What had begun as a challenge was now a shared examination. People were no longer choosing sides. They were choosing questions. The moderator cleared his throat softly, signaling that the exchange had reached a natural pause. Let's take a moment, he said, before we move forward. No one applauded. No one objected. They sat in silence, heavy, thoughtful silence, the kind that signals not conflict, but change. Something fundamental was unfolding, not just between two speakers, but within the room itself. When the moderator invited the discussion to continue, the shift in atmosphere was unmistakable. The tension was no longer sharp, it had softened into something heavier, more contemplative. This was no longer a debate people watched. It was a process they were inside. Sister Amanda spoke first. Perhaps, she said carefully, we are circling the issue from the wrong angle. Let us talk about Jesus himself. A subtle ripple moved through the audience. She continued, her voice steady but quieter than before. What distinguishes Jesus from all others is not only his message, but his life, his birth, his miracles, his authority over life and death. She described the healings, the restoration of sight, the raising of the dead. These, she argued, were not merely signs of a mission, but indications of a nature beyond that of a messenger. Does this not suggest, she asked, that he was more than a teacher? More than a prophet? The young Muslim woman listened attentively. She did not rush to respond. When she spoke, her voice remained calm, almost reflective. Miracles, she said, are extraordinary, but they point beyond themselves. She explained that throughout history, many individuals were supported by extraordinary signs. The purpose of those signs, she said, was not to redefine the human being who performed them, but to affirm the source that enabled them. A miracle, she continued, is not proof of identity. It is proof of permission. Some students looked up sharply at that phrase. If power alone defined divinity, she added, then every extraordinary act would blur the line between the creator and the created. That line exists for a reason. She spoke respectfully, emphasizing that Jesus was deeply honored in her faith, as a messenger of God, a figure of moral purity, and a sign of divine will. His greatness, she said, was not diminished by his humanity. On the contrary, she added, his humanity is what makes his message meaningful. Sister Amanda responded quickly. But what of his birth? She asked. Born without a father. Surely that sets him apart. The young woman nodded. It sets him apart in how he was created, she said, not what he was. She spoke gently, explaining that human origin varies, yet origin does not define essence. The capacity to create without precedent, she said, reflects the power of the Creator, not the elevation of the created being. The beginning does not redefine the nature, she said. It reveals the will behind it. The room was quiet now. No shifting. No whispers. Sister Amanda pressed on. And his authority? She asked. He spoke with command. He forgave. He transformed lives. The young woman answered with care. Authority can be granted, she said. Guidance can be entrusted. Influence does not require divinity, it requires truth. She paused briefly, then added, if every messenger were reduced because they were human, then humanity itself would be disqualified from receiving guidance. That line resonated. Several students wrote it down. Sister Amanda took a step back from the podium, then forward again, gathering herself. But Christianity is built on relationship, she said. On love expressed through sacrifice. The young woman acknowledged this respectfully. Sacrifice is powerful, she said. It moves hearts. But emotional power does not automatically establish universal truth. She explained that suffering can inspire, but it does not become a rule by default. Moral clarity, she said, must still align with justice and coherence. True compassion, she added, does not erase responsibility. It calls people to rise to it. A student in the front row shifted, visibly moved. Sister Amanda hesitated, then spoke more softly. You speak of justice, she said. But what of forgiveness? The young woman smiled gently. Forgiveness matters, she said. Because choice matters. She explained that forgiveness has meaning only when accountability exists. Otherwise, it becomes symbolic rather than transformative. Forgiveness does not deny responsibility, she said. It responds to it. The room felt different again, less like a forum, more like a classroom where something rare was happening, collective clarity. The moderator glanced at the clock, then back at the speakers. He allowed the exchange to continue. Sister Amanda's voice, when she spoke again, carried something new, not conviction, but sincerity. Then tell me, she said, where does your faith place ultimate guidance? The young woman answered without hesitation. In a message preserved with intention, she said. A message that invites reflection, not confusion. A message delivered by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who did not claim divinity, but responsibility. The name was spoken with respect, calmly, without emphasis. She continued, his role was not to replace reason, but to awaken it. Not to burden humanity, but to remind it of its moral agency. No one reacted defensively. No one interrupted. The moment felt balanced. The moderator finally raised his hand gently. Let's pause here, he said. Not because the discussion was exhausted, but because it was deepening. The audience remained silent, absorbing the weight of what had been said. Not agreement. Not rejection. Understanding. Something had shifted, not dramatically, but permanently. When the moderator invited the conversation forward once more, the room felt different than it had at the start of the evening. The sharp edges of certainty had softened. What remained was something quieter, curiosity mixed with vulnerability. Sister Amanda spoke again, but this time her voice lacked the earlier firmness. It wasn't weakness. It was honesty. You speak of responsibility, she said, and of a message preserved with clarity. But history is full of suffering. If guidance exists, why does pain persist so deeply in human life? The question did not sound rhetorical. It sounded personal. A hush fell over the audience. This was no longer doctrine versus doctrine. It was the question every human eventually asks. The young Muslim woman did not answer immediately. She looked at Sister Amanda, not as an opponent, but as a fellow human being. Pain, she said slowly, does not automatically mean absence of guidance. She explained that struggle is not evidence of abandonment. Rather, it is the space where meaning is revealed. Without difficulty, choice becomes irrelevant. Without resistance, growth loses definition. If life were effortless, she said, Then moral courage, patience, and sincerity would have no stage to exist on. She spoke of hardship not as punishment, but as exposure, revealing what lies beneath comfort. In that sense, suffering was not random, but purposeful, even when its purpose was not immediately visible. Sister Amanda listened closely, her eyes fixed, her hands no longer gripping the microphone tightly. "But what of those who suffer unjustly?" she asked. "Children. Innocents. Those who never chose their pain." The young woman nodded, acknowledging the weight of the question. "Not all justice is immediate," she said. "And not all meaning is confined to the moment." She explained that moral accounting, to be fair, cannot be limited to a single chapter of existence. A story interrupted halfway cannot be judged by its unfinished pages. If justice ended at death, she said, then injustice would rule the universe. That sentence landed heavily. Several students lowered their heads. Others stared ahead, motionless. She continued, "Accountability that transcends time is the only framework where fairness can survive the reality of unequal suffering." Sister Amanda exhaled slowly. "You speak as though human life is preparation," she said. "In a sense," the young woman replied. "It is formation." She described life as a process rather than a verdict, a space where intention, effort, and integrity shape something deeper than immediate outcomes. "Ease doesn't define worth," she added. "Response does." The moderator watched closely, sensing that the conversation was no longer theoretical. Sister Amanda shifted her stance. "You've spoken about coherence," she said. "About clarity. But many people find comfort in surrendering understanding." The young woman answered gently. "Surrender has value," she said. "But surrender without awareness risks becoming escape." She explained that true peace does not come from silencing questions, but from resolving them honestly. "A belief system that discourages inquiry," she said, "may protect certainty, but at the cost of growth. Truth does not fear examination," she added. "It survives it." That line moved through the room like a quiet current. Sister Amanda looked down briefly, then back up. "I was taught," she said softly, "that questioning weakens faith." The young woman responded without hesitation. "Questioning refines faith," she said. "Fear weakens it." A few students inhaled sharply. The statement was simple, but it carried weight. The room was no longer divided into sides. It felt unified by reflection. Sister Amanda spoke again, slower now. "If responsibility is central," she said, "then failure carries weight." "Yes," the young woman replied. "But so does repentance." She explained that accountability does not close the door to mercy, it gives mercy direction. Correction, effort, and humility become meaningful only when choice is real. "Forgiveness," she said, "is not diminished by responsibility. It is defined by it." The moderator glanced around the hall. No one was restless. No one checked their phone. This was no longer an event. It was an encounter. Sister Amanda's voice, when she spoke again, was quieter than before. "I defended certainty," she said, "because I feared uncertainty." The young woman met her gaze. "Uncertainty," she said gently, "is not the enemy of faith. It is often its doorway." Silence followed, not heavy, but alive. The moderator finally stepped forward. "Let's pause here," he said. Not because the conversation had reached an end, but because it had reached depth. The audience remained seated, absorbing the moment. Something internal had begun to move, slowly, irrevocably. The pause the moderator called did not feel like a break, it felt like a breath. The kind taken before something honest is said out loud. When the discussion resumed, Sister Amanda did not immediately return to theology. Instead, she stood quietly for a moment, looking out at the audience as if seeing them differently than before. "There is something I need to admit," she said at last. Her voice was steady, but softer than it had been all evening. "I have spent years defending what I believed to be certainty. I was trained to answer questions, but not always to sit with them. The room was utterly still. She turned her gaze back toward the young Muslim woman. "You haven't attacked my faith," she said. "You've exposed its pressure points." The words were not accusatory. They were reflective. The young woman did not respond immediately. She allowed the silence to exist, to do its work. Sister Amanda continued. "I was taught that doubt was weakness. That obedience meant silence. That loyalty required defense, even when understanding felt incomplete." She paused, swallowing slightly. "But tonight," she said, "I realized something unsettling." She hesitated again, then spoke plainly. "I realized that some of the answers I defended most fiercely were answers I had never fully examined." A collective stillness settled over the hall, not shock, but recognition. Many in the audience felt the statement land somewhere personal. The young woman finally spoke. Her tone was gentle, almost reassuring. "Honesty," she said, "is not betrayal. It is courage." She explained that inherited beliefs often feel safest because they come with community, structure, and identity. Letting go of certainty, even partially, can feel like stepping into isolation. But clarity, she added, is not found by avoiding discomfort. It's found by moving through it. Sister Amanda nodded slowly. "I've always believed faith should bring peace," she said. "But I see now that I confuse peace with avoidance." The young woman responded carefully. "Peace doesn't mean the absence of struggle," she said. "It means alignment. When belief and reason no longer fight each other." That sentence echoed quietly across the room. The moderator remained silent, sensing that this exchange no longer required guidance. Sister Amanda took a deep breath. "You speak of alignment," she said. "Of coherence. But changing perspective has consequences." She glanced briefly toward the audience. "Communities. Expectations. Identity." The young woman acknowledged this with a nod. "Yes," she said. "Truth often costs comfort." She explained that growth rarely happens without loss of familiarity, of certainty, of approval. But what replaces it, she said, is integrity. When belief is honest, she added, it no longer needs constant defense. Sister Amanda's hands trembled slightly as she held the microphone. Not from fear, but from gravity. "I've spent years telling others what to believe," she said. "But I never asked myself whether I truly understood why." Her voice wavered, then steadied. "For the first time," she said, "I don't feel threatened by questions. I feel invited." A visible emotional shift passed through the audience. Some students blinked back tears. Others sat motionless, deeply affected. The young woman spoke again, quietly. "Questions are not doors away from faith," she said. "They are doors deeper into it." She explained that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did not demand belief through force or fear, but through reflection and moral clarity. His message, she said, called people to think, to observe, and to choose consciously. Faith, she added, was never meant to replace the mind. It was meant to guide it. No one reacted defensively. The mention felt natural, respectful, contextual. Sister Amanda closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. When she spoke, her voice carried emotion she no longer tried to conceal. "I am afraid," she said honestly. "Not of truth, but of what following it might require of me." The young woman stepped forward slightly, not invading space, but bridging it. "Fear," she said softly, "doesn't mean you're wrong. It means something real is at stake." She explained that sincerity often begins where certainty ends. When answers no longer feel rehearsed, but lived. Sister Amanda nodded, tears gathering but not yet falling. "I don't know what comes next," she said. The young woman answered gently. "You don't have to," she said. "Clarity doesn't demand immediacy. It asks for sincerity." The moderator finally stood, sensing the moment had reached its natural threshold. "Let's conclude this round," he said quietly. No one moved. No applause followed. Because what had just happened was not a performance. It was a turning. Something inside Sister Amanda had shifted, not into resolution, but into honesty. And that, everyone sensed, was the beginning of something irreversible. The hall remained silent long after the moderator announced the final segment. It was not the silence of hesitation, but the silence of recognition, the kind that follows a moment when something irreversible has already happened. Sister Amanda stood very still. The microphone felt heavier now, not because of fear, but because of truth. "I came here tonight," she said slowly, "believing I was here to defend faith." She paused, then continued with quiet clarity. "But I realize now, I was here to defend certainty." Her words settled gently over the audience. "I was taught," she said, "that faith meant standing firm, never wavering, never questioning. That strength was measured by how loudly one could declare belief." She shook her head faintly. "But what I felt tonight, what I feel now, is something different." She looked directly at the young Muslim woman. "For the first time," she said, "I don't feel like I lost ground. I feel like I found honesty." A soft, collective breath moved through the room. The young woman did not speak immediately. She understood that this moment did not belong to her. Sister Amanda continued, her voice steady but emotional. "I realize now that certainty without understanding is fragile. It survives only when it is protected from questions." She swallowed, then said quietly, "And anything that fears questions is already unstable." Tears finally slipped down her cheeks, not dramatic, not uncontrolled, but sincere. "I don't stand here tonight claiming answers," she said. "I stand here acknowledging responsibility. Responsibility to be truthful with myself." She turned slightly toward the audience. "I was never taught that faith could coexist with reason. That belief could grow stronger through examination. That clarity could be gentler than fear." The young woman stepped forward just enough to be present, not dominant. "Faith," she said softly, "is not proven by silence. It is proven by integrity." She explained that truth does not demand instant transformation. It asks only for sincerity, the willingness to follow clarity wherever it leads. "No one is asked to abandon their past overnight," she added, "only to stop protecting what no longer makes sense." Sister Amanda nodded through tears. "I don't know what this means for my future," she said honestly. "My community. My role. My identity." The young woman met her gaze. "Truth does not erase who you were," she said. "It refines who you are becoming." That sentence resonated deeply. Sister Amanda took a breath, then said something that surprised even herself. "I used to believe peace came from certainty," she said. "Now I see it comes from alignment." She looked around the hall, at the students, the faculty, the quiet witnesses. "If belief requires me to silence my conscience," she said, "then it is not peace. It is avoidance." The moderator remained still, knowing that intervention would only interrupt something sacred. The young woman spoke once more, her voice calm and grounded. "The message brought by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him," she said, "did not ask people to surrender their minds. It asked them to use them honestly." She emphasized that guidance was never about coercion, but about clarity. About restoring moral responsibility, dignity, and coherence to human choice. "Truth," she said, "does not force itself. It waits to be recognized." Sister Amanda wiped her tears and nodded. "I am not announcing conclusions tonight," she said, "but I am announcing something more difficult." She paused, then said quietly, "I am no longer afraid to ask." That was when the room changed completely. Not with applause. Not with cheers. But with stillness, deep, reverent stillness. The young woman extended her hand gently. Not as a victor. Not as a guide. But as a fellow human being. Sister Amanda took it. The gesture was simple, unceremonious, and profoundly human. Many in the audience felt tears they didn't expect. Not sadness, but recognition. The recognition that truth does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes, it arrives honestly. The moderator finally stepped forward. "This session is concluded," he said softly. No one moved right away. People remained seated, as if leaving too quickly would break something fragile and new. When they finally rose and began to exit the hall, they did so quietly, each carrying something inward. Not answers, but courage. The hall emptied slowly, leaving behind only echoes. Not of argument,